Hey, welcome to the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Brian Christopherson. I'm joined by Michael Bruntz. How you doing, Michael?
Not bad. It's weird that you called me Michael. The
You're in
I'm not.
trouble.
I know. Yeah, that's basically what did I do wrong? I'm not bad. How are you doing? It's
Yeah,
Wednesday.
I usually call you Bruntz, I guess, don't I?
Yeah,
So
everybody does.
sorry I messed that up. This is Bruntz on the other end. You can refer to him as that. We're very informal here. And Yeah, let's talk some football. Let's just get right into it. I don't have a lot of good banter planned, and I don't feel like I'm going to be good off the cuff with banter today. So we'll get right into Nebraska has won 2 games in a row. First time they've done that in the Big Ten since 2018. So it's been tough
It's
around here.
it's kind of remarkable. Like when you start putting like superlatives on it like that, like just how bad things have been.
Yeah, and that's why it was ugly. The win was ugly Friday night against Rutgers. They won the thing 14-13, rallied from a 13-0 halftime deficit where it looked very bleak in New Jersey. It was kind of a rave party with a football game in the middle. There was music just happening and not a sellout crowd, as Mickey Joseph pointed out at the press conference yesterday, and he was right about that. And yet, the boys found a way to pull that thing out. They were very happy on the field. It was kind of you would say they're pretty pumped up about maybe stealing the W.
Yep.
And you can't apologize for winning right now. Never apologize for it, but especially when you've been where Nebraska has been.
Yeah. No, the best part I thought of the post game celebration was, well, there were two things. One was Bill Busch looking to basically high five whoever he possibly could walking out of that tunnel, going back towards the Nebraska locker room. And the second was some like 10-year-old Rutgers fan just giving Nebraska players the double bird as they were heading to the locker room. I don't I don't know what the future holds for that kid, but he's going to be opinionated apparently. So yeah, it was bad, and I mean right down to the last snap. I mean Nebraska fumbled the snap in the victory formation because Rutgers was diving at everybody's knees, but those are games that, as bad as they were, and what we went from Broncos Colts on Thursday night to whatever that was on Friday. Um, they they haven't won those types of ugly games for a long, long time, and I don't know where this season is going, but it felt like a little bit of progress that even if Nebraska could look like absolute crap for 3 quarters of football, that they're able to win, even against a Rutgers team that is not. I don't think they're great by any stretch, but those are the types of games that, for the last, I mean, going back to 2017, even 2015, that Nebraska has found new and exciting ways to lose, and they actually won, and that to me is a little bit of progress.
Yeah, you could basically say every year but 2016, they've been mostly on the losing end of those type of games. And
Yeah,
the big positive is the defense right now. You have to say since Bill Busch took the thing over, that it keeps coming back that it's just simplification and getting guys' feet set and they're ready at the snap and they're flying around. It feels like there has to be more to it than that, but whatever it is, um, they don't let one snowball that gets thrown in their face lead to an avalanche. It's like in the past, it's felt like if something bad happens, I always use the Weezer reference of the sweater song. You pull the thread, it comes undone, and that's the Husker defense. It had been to start the season. A case in point where they are not that group is when you have a punt block and Blaze Gunnerson saves a tackle inside your own 10. That's 3 weeks ago, a touchdown in 2 plays or less for the opposing team. And Nebraska instead holds them to a field goal, and that ends up being the difference. I didn't feel like they had a real great footing in the first half, even after the first drive, Bruns, because if you look at the numbers, I think they had given up like 260 yards or something. So, I mean, they were on pace for a terrible statistical game. And yet in the second half, they gave up, was it 75, something like that?
Yeah.
80, they just had a firm grip, and Garrett Nelson was good. They got pressure. The guys who came off the bench, like Brandon Moore and Hartzog, did enough in their jobs. Malga Clemens. And I just like the fact that they didn't let a negative early turn into just like, this is the theme of the night. They punched back against it. And they're doing some good things on that side. Now Rutgers has a quarterback problem, and that offense was abysmal.
They fired the coordinator. This
Nebraska,
week.
Every week somebody gets fired that's involved with the Nebraska game. It feels like. But they hired a guy named Nunzio, I believe, as the OC, which makes sense. That should be why that guy was not the offensive coordinator at Rutgers prior to this. I have no idea.
Yeah, if you're Purdue's coaching staff, you got to be feeling like this is probably a must-win game, right? Like you got to get this one.
Yeah, some coordinators like not sleeping this week at Purdue. But what do you think about the defense, real quick, Bruntz? I mean, just like what stood out to you about it in them getting it done? Because early on, I felt they had a couple of plays where they leaked yardage that just shouldn't have been there. Like there was that 43-yard play where Caleb Tanner and a few guys were there, and we were in the box, and we're like, how the heck did that not go for nothing?
Yeah,
and yet they held them down.
There was that play. Rutgers hit a couple of early deep balls on Hartzog that I kind of felt like it was like, oh no, here we go. And you mentioned Nebraska having to lean on Brandon Moore and Hartzog in that second half. You didn't have Luke Reimer. What I do think you could see is the time kind of or as the game kind of went along, I felt like the front was pretty active. And I think it was, Mickey or somebody was talking yesterday about, really making sure that early in the game that you're rotating more because you want those guys to be able to get after the quarterback on fourth down, or in the fourth quarter. There was that play where again, Garrett Nelson had a sack that kind of put Rutgers out of field goal range. Yeah. I mean, that was a huge play in the game. I thought, he's been good in 2 straight weeks. Ty Robinson was disruptive again. And, they just played solid in the second half. And that's, against teams that, are struggling. That's all you have to do is don't give them leaky yards. Don't give them opportunities to, for additional downs and things like that. And I think this defense has been solid in that aspect since Bill Busch took over. It was one of those games too where, if you just kind of look at the box score, especially early, I mean, that very little was going Nebraska's favor. They were getting killed in the field position game. Their backs were against the wall quite a bit on offense. Defense was, holding up well, but, to force the 2 field goals in the first half, I mean, that was pretty much the game right there. And it allowed, Nebraska to feel going into the locker room that they had a chance to come back in the second half. I mean, coaches said that the players were confident throughout halftime that they were going to win that football game, but it looks a heck of a lot different at 13-0 versus, maybe 21-0 if Nebraska's not able to get those stops. So it was another good kind of confidence builder for the defense. And we'll see if they can build on that going forward, because it's going to be a completely different animal this week with Purdue and what they can do, because they're kind of a team that, if you need to kind of run for yards, they're going to do it. They can chuck it around on you. So this is a different challenge for Nebraska's defense this week.
Yeah. The last thought on the defense, it's one of those performances you appreciate more, I think, after the game, because when you're in it and the offense is scuffling as bad as they are, you're so distracted by this wreck over on the side of the road, that you sometimes don't appreciate, like the Nelson sack near the end of the half that you brought up, and how big that ends up being at the end of the day. And that's where it's difficult for a team, and show some maturity, that the defense was able to, in those moments, like, no, just play the snap in front of you and let's see how this thing, works its way through to the finish. Now moving to the offensive side of the ball, there's not a lot I can say. I mean,
you saw the game.
Yeah. I mean, they found a way, but really the one drive, their first touchdown drive was their best drive. And that one was aided by some penalties, but they took advantage of it. They converted a 4th and 2. They converted a 3rd and 7, I believe, where Palmer caught one that was kind of behind him inside the 10-yard line. And that was a key drive. Like, I think if they had come out in the third quarter and just laid an egg, it would have been a real difficult task and, maybe a real mental challenge for the defense as well. But I think that lifted the sideline when it was suddenly a 13-7 game. Yeah. And there's a thinking like, Rutgers isn't going to score much more. Like, if you can piece one more drive together, you might win the thing.
Yeah. All right. Talking offense, I mean, Nebraska averaged 2.5 a carry on the ground. Casey Thompson, again, looked like a crash test dummy at times, just getting thrown around. Where we're at in this season right now, what do you see as a potential fix for this offensive line? Because Mickey Joseph said yesterday that the changes are possible. Would that really help at this point? Because you already saw Bryce Benhart only play 7 snaps against Rutgers. That was one notable change. What can they do at this point aside from just having to start scheme things up to get Casey out on the run and stuff like that to protect him? Because if you go back and watch that game, I mean, they were keeping tight ends in, they were keeping running backs in. It's you're going to be challenged over the last half of the season, and that offensive line isn't making it any easier.
Yeah, that's a good point about keeping extras at home to try to help the O-line, because that's the first thing you would say as well. You got to give those guys some help with some more bodies. But I think they've already been trying that. And, Mickey did say, yes, the 5 could switch. I think a name that maybe he's been around, but maybe pops up again is Brant Banks, because Banks came in, for Corcoran in that Indiana game when he got ejected and played actually pretty well. Like, as far as the O-line's been going, he played better than a lot of guys have been doing. And I wonder if you maybe give Banks a look again at some spot. It's been tough for Turner. It really has at left tackle. And, he's a 4-star recruit, and he's just struggled with the pass pro. Obviously, Benhart has, and I know Benhart's sort of the pinata of people, but then Hunter Anthony came in. And if you're just going to call it like it is, he scuffled too. Like, he was in there when Casey got hurt and on that play. So I don't know that there's just a magical personnel fix. And Mickey admitted as much. I kind of said in a question to him yesterday, I mean, you kind of are who you are personnel wise, right? And he kind of concurred. So I don't know that Latovsky's a young guy I think can be good, and he's been a pretty good run blocker, but he struggled in pass pro at right guard, and Bando, I think, is still ahead of him. Who are your 2 best guys? Hickson's your best guy. Maybe Bando's second right now. I don't know if you're to rank them.
Yeah, I would probably say Hickson's your first, and beyond that, I mean, it's
been inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been anybody consistently there. What do you, from what we've seen in these 2 weeks of, post-bye week of just Mark Whipple calling plays, what do you see as like Nebraska can kind of hang its hat on going forward? Because they were okay against Indiana, but I mean, it was just such tough going last week. I mean, what are you expecting to see this week that like gives you confidence that Nebraska is going to be able to get it done on offense?
I don't have confidence, but I do know that sometimes O-line gets knocked all week, and everybody can think it's really bad. And this group has a lot of data points that's suggesting that's the case. But once in a while, though, you'll see a group just come out, and for whatever reason, it kind of clicks, and you find a couple plays early on, and you get that first drive where you're going downhill a little bit. I think it's got to start with the run game. And I know how much they knocked their head against the wall against Rutgers. They ended up with 72 net rushing yards, I think, by the end of the game. Anthony Grant really couldn't get going. I mean, he was 8th in the country in rushing coming into that, and he took a dip in his numbers. But I think when you talk about what is the stronger suit of the guys they have up front, I think it's run blocking. And obviously, you got to be able to throw the ball. And I'm not saying they're a great run blocking team, but I think they're a little bit better at that than pass blocking, or they feel a little more comfortable with that. And that's where they've just got to get something going early on with that, where they can use a little clock. They can run Grant, and Mickey said this, we got to be happy with 3 or 4 yards. I think he said it on his TV show, running the ball and knowing that you're setting up manageable 3rd and shorts. And so that's going to be a big key Saturday. Is I think if they can run on 1st down, and even if it's like 3 yards, you kind of, if you're sitting on your couch at home, you're like, okay, they're setting themselves up where they can get to a 3rd and 3 or something, and Casey's not going to have a lot of time, and you can get a 1st down, you can move the chains, you can move the clock. That's the type of game they need to play, I think, where it's little chunks. And then this is a team that's going to need that big play at some point too, where you get Palmer over the top too, all that's of course got to be part of the equation.
Yeah. Purdue, I believe, has not given up a 100-yard rushing game this year. It's going to be tough sledding, but your point's right though. I mean, I think you almost kind of need to kind of bang your head against the wall a little bit with the run game and try to set up some of the pass. I mean, it's Anthony Grant's the kind of guy where, and we've seen it this year. I mean, even if he's having to make a guy miss 3 yards deep in the backfield, he still has a chance to get you 3 or 4 more than likely. I was a little surprised that Nebraska didn't go to Grant more against Rutgers, especially earlier in the game. So that's something to watch, I guess. But, they did get Travis Vokalek back involved in the passing game. I think you saw the benefits of that. He, of course, scored his first touchdown as a Husker in that game. Trey Palmer had the big catch. And, beyond that, I mean, we'll kind of see what else they can shake loose, whether you get Marcus Washington going or maybe a little Tommy Hill on a wide receiver, signature Tommy play. And beyond that, I mean, that you just got to find something that you can kind of make work. And I think your point about complementary football is an important one, because I think this is a defense that can make life a little bit more difficult for teams. But Nebraska's got to win the time of possession, and they've done it the last couple games. But that's got to be something that they have to continue to dominate. I mean, it's almost like Nebraska kind of needs to kind of drag it into the mud and make it a 4-quarter game, because that's the type of game that they're probably going to win versus a track meet in some of these games.
Yeah. And you can't, I know O'Connell, I don't believe, played in that game a few weeks ago where they scuffled and barely beat Florida Atlantic. It was like 28-26 or something. But the thing I'll say about this is Purdue's a double-digit favorite, and I totally understand why. Like, I get why that the odds makers have put it there, and I don't question it. But I do think also you don't go into this game and act like, it's not like Purdue is some force that you couldn't take down. If you played a sharp football game, if you won the turnover battle, and you were able to limit their explosive plays on offense to a degree and make them have to sort of navigate their way down the field on 10, 11 play drives, you've got a shot. But it all comes down to the O-line. And the O-line right now, I think, is what is keeping people from, frankly, sort of having this thought like something special could happen, because it's out there in the West. You see it, and this division's there to be taken. And there's excitement about Mickey and what Bill Bush has done with the defense. And then you're like, oh, yeah, the offensive line. That's a rather important part of football. And, man, that looks rough.
This giant anchor we've been dragging around this season.
Yeah. So that's that one little thing, that monster thing, is really, I think, what has people sort of like, okay, I'm happy they've won the last 2 games, but look at the schedule now. How are they going to get through this with that line playing the way it is? And the answer is they can't. They've got to be a lot better, fast, and somehow figure some ways around that.
You mentioned the last 2 games and Mickey, and let's talk a little coaching search, because that's always the big thing going on kind of in the background of whatever this run is that Nebraska's on. The maybe not clamoring, but it's like a dull roar maybe with 2 straight wins for Mickey and kind of what he can do. I mean, we just kind of laid out all the challenges that you kind of have with this roster. And Nebraska's got Purdue, and then they have another bye week, and then you get into November. Are you starting to believe that Mickey has more of a shot at this thing than maybe what we thought going into the first bye week? Like, I guess, what do you make so far of Mickey Joseph's tenure as interim head coach, and how does that fit into whatever decision Trev Alberts is ultimately going to have to make about who the next head coach is?
I think he's been really good. I mean, I think you have to at least keep the interview going with full consideration. And I'm not somebody like who right now at this point in October is like, give that guy the job, because of this story or that story. There's all these great stories about Mickey, and it makes you feel good about how he's leading this team in this moment and possibly how he could in the future. But the schedule is going to get tough now. And I kind of want to see, can they do something sort of unexpected against teams where Nebraska is going to be underdogs now? Could he get them to a bowl game? If he gets them to 6 wins, that's a heck of a coaching job. Like, from where this group was in September, because this season had already been buried in the dirt. I mean, he's doing a good job. The fact that we're talking about this game on Saturday as like, okay, the Big Ten West is there, and Nebraska's involved in a game that people are paying attention to for the standings, and it matters. I didn't expect that, after the Oklahoma game. I would not have bet my Toyota RAV that they were going to win. And you know how I feel about my vehicles.
It's a low-key flex there, mentioning the RAV.
Oh, is that? Yeah. Look at this guy with his 18 RAV talking it up.
Look how sensible he is.
Yeah. Gets decent mileage.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would not have bet that they're going to win the last 2 games, even though I know Rutgers and Indiana are at the bottom of the barrel. Because guess what? Nebraska's at the bottom of the barrel. So that's where you got to consider what Mickey's doing. You can't just say, oh, well, those teams stunk. You can't give that any credit. Nebraska stunk before that, and maybe they have to show they don't stink still, like against better teams, So I just like the way he's provided a spark, and he's so totally involved with everybody in the roster. Like, when Sean Beckton, I thought, gave the best. People can go find it. We wrote about it. He was on the radio, and he talked about Mickey behind the scenes and just how he's in all the defensive meetings. He's in all the offensive meetings. He's the other day, guys were talking about how he's right there over the ball after every snap, and he's just there. He's constant, and he's calling guys in. He's like, hey, send so-and-so into my room. I want to meet with him before you have your position meeting. I just want to get to know him and talk to him. All that stuff is great. It does come down to wins and losses. But on the other surface level stuff that goes with this job, he's doing a tremendous job in the first month. And I also think Bruntz, he's not getting caught up in what anybody else thinks. I get the sense he's just like, I'm going in, I'm working, I'm with this team, and I'm not worrying about all the commotion. They can have their search. I know that my resume is what we put on the field the next 6-7 weeks.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that I think Mickey is being himself. I mean, I think that's really important in a situation like this, and I think that's why you've also seen a lot of buy-in from players, because if he, all of a sudden gets the interim tag, goes in there and is a completely different guy, players pick up on that and they understand that. And I think that, with the head coach being fired, with the defensive coordinator being fired, I think there's a lot of reasons for guys to pack it in. And, I think the one thing that had to happen if this season was going to turn a little bit and kind of start going in a good direction, you had to win those first two of this 3-game stretch. I mean, you needed a lot of buy-in, and I think he's gotten that from his team. I think you're seeing a little bit more of just spirit from these guys. And you watch Mickey on the sidelines. He's an emotional guy. People feed off that. I think the players really have responded to that. And I think also, he's had a good plan for how he would kind of do things. So, it's a small thing, but I was impressed with the way that he kind of navigated the last 6 minutes of that game the other night. I mean, the kind of getting the car in the garage at the end of a game like that, especially for new head coaches. I mean, it's not a given. And I thought he handled that really well. I think he's done a good job of kind of blocking out the noise, like you said, and just kind of getting to work. And, I think he's off to a good start. And I mean, if you're right. I think if you start getting into bowl conversations, you start talking about meaningful football late in November for the Big Ten West, I think that kind of changes the conversation a little bit for, what his readiness and candidacy looks like for this job. And I think Trev Alberts is giving him a legitimate shot at this and letting it kind of play out while also going about, the work of vetting candidates and things like that. So I think he's almost kind of playing with house money a little bit, with the way things have gone so far for this team. You kind of say that too with the background of now Matt Rhule being available after being fired from Carolina. And that's kind of, when Scott Frost was fired and you're putting together your hot board, the big what if was when Matt Rhule was going to be available, if he was going to be available. And, as we sit here on October 12th, he's all of a sudden sitting on a $40 million buyout and is currently unemployed. Where do you think he fits into this conversation?
Well, I like Matt Rhule as a candidate. I have from the beginning, and I think I would say from the start on our podcast, we kind of looked at Rhule as a guy who was not an NFL guy, even before that season was starting. You just had the sense of how it had gone in Carolina that wasn't his lane, and that it was probably going to end sort of how it did. And I don't think less of him for that. Some people will say, well, what about that? And I don't know. There's been some really good coaches in college who just weren't made for that league. There's a different personality. It's a different, you just, so I don't make a big deal about that. I mean, you at least, you put it on the paper and it's part of his story, but what he did in taking over programs that had, been losers right before he got there, and within 3 or 4 years he had them in double-digit wins, is pretty impressive at both Temple and Baylor. Now, I'll give the other side of that because people have brought it up, and I think it's fair in the discussion. When Rhule was at Temple, they were switching conferences, I believe, and they went to did they go to the AAC that right after he got there, I think? But they maybe had a good conference setup, but also they had won a fair amount of games like a couple years before he took over. Like not the year before, but they'd had a decent foundation. So somebody could look at it and say, well, it was sort of getting set up for a guy to come in and kind of build it up. And somebody might say that about Baylor because he took over after the Briles fiasco, where Baylor basically just had to take it on the chin for a couple of years. But Bruntz, that there's a lot of resources down there in Waco. And they weren't going to let that thing just go back to being in the ditch permanently. Like that's the type of program where it would expect to bounce back at that point. And still, he did it in 2 or 3 years. He got it to 1 win, then 7 wins, then 11 wins. Pretty good. I know there's a knock against how many ranked teams he beat. I think he's a good builder. I think he'll probably do well somewhere at the college level. And I think Nebraska should kick the tires on him. And that's all I'll say. I'm not going to wave pom-poms for a guy. Trev's got to do a lot of research, and there's got to be like a lot of deep questions that we're not going to know the answers to before you decide like this guy does fit what I'm looking for. So it's easy for us on the outside without hearing that to like say, yeah, this guy or that guy. I just think he's a guy you got to look at, and I think they probably have.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing about him too, I mean, both at Temple and at Baylor, I mean, there was talent when he got there, but I think he also maximized some of the guys that he brought in too. I mean, he was really about finding explosiveness, was looking for very specific qualities in the guys that he recruited. And certainly, when you're in Texas, you benefit from, it's a little bit like Scott Frost at UCF, where there's so much talent within a car ride from your campus. It makes things a little bit easier for you. But I think when you're talking about, the kind of coach that Nebraska needs, I mean, whoever it is going to have to either find some kind of advantage in recruiting or, really recruit gangbusters. And, I think Rhule has shown that he, has an eye for certain qualities and players that he can develop and turn into legit players and draftable players. And I think that's, makes him intriguing to me aside from, what you said kind of about his background too. He's a Big Ten guy. He went to Penn State. I think he, has an understanding, I think, of the Big Ten. So there's a lot to like there. And I think him coming available certainly, is a benefit to Nebraska's search. Now, I mean, a guy that looks like he's been through the ringer the last few years in Carolina. He's got the huge buyout. Was it $40 million that he's basically like monthly going to be cashing like $800,000 checks. So how eager is he going to be to get right back in?
Yeah.
That's something I think that warrants consideration. But I just think, when you kind of look at the checklist that Trev laid out when he made the change, I think Rhule at least, fits quite a few of those kind of traits that I think would play well at Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, Rhule can be as choosy as he wants to be, probably, and nobody's a sure thing. Like you tweet about a guy, and everybody there, you get people like hard pass, or something. They'll have these big, bold opinions, and I don't know that anybody, like, you could say that guy's going to fail or that guy's going to succeed. I don't know why I think this, Bruntz. I don't know if you do. Of the candidates, when I hear their names, Rhule is one where I don't know if it would work or not. But he's got like a high ceiling to me, if that makes sense. Like, he's one of those guys where I could picture, like, if you want to swing for a guy and hope he could not just get you to 8 or 9 wins again, but like in the future, you're just suddenly a balling program again, that's in the top 10, top 15. There's something about him that would at least give me that like hope, that maybe he could do that. And I guess it's just because he got Baylor to 11 wins in year 3. Different job, different situation, but yeah, you gotta look at him. I mean, Lance Leipold continues to do really good stuff at Kansas. Maybe lost his QB for the year, it seems. Although there's a little back and forth about that. I guess the QB kind of refuted a report that said that. But I mean, Leipold, it's hard to argue with what he's doing down at Kansas, and I'm sure Trev is completely dialed into that one. And Campbell has picked a bad time to go on a 3-game losing streak. Matt Campbell at Iowa State, and I'm not discounting Mickey. I don't want to make it seem like, because we had this Rhule conversation, that we're like, oh, Mickey can't do it. If Mickey wins on Saturday night at Purdue, when everybody's going to pick Purdue, and we're sitting at the bye and they're 4-3, that conversation is going to heat up around here.
That sets up a very, very big game in that scenario. A very big game at home against Brett in the Fighting Illini after the break.
Wouldn't that be something? I mean, that really would be like if they got to 4-3 and Illinois were coming here, and I mean, people would be fired up for that game. Nebraska, Illinois. Who would have? That Illinois squad plays some defense. That guy needs to get hired somewhere. Ryan Walters in Colorado. He's a Colorado alum, but I don't know if he wants to go into that fire. But
I hope for his sake he doesn't go there.
Yeah,
that's where careers go to die.
Man, he's got them playing some ball though. Right. Last question, Bruntz. Who's your favorite in the West right now? You can change it by next week.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably have to say I like what Illinois is doing. I mean, it feels like they've got they play defense. They've got an offense that can the kind of classic Bielema offense where you've got a quarterback that can do a few things, but not too much, just a little bit. You've got a running back that you can kind of run behind, and you've got a couple playmakers on the edge. And we'll see. I need to dig into the schedules a little bit more, but they're I don't know that they're a fluke in that defense. Everybody kind of shuts down Iowa, but winning that kind of a game against Iowa, I think, was probably a big step for them. As much as it pained everybody else to have to watch it.
Yeah, that was a good win for them. You gotta fight. You just got to know you're going to have an ugly fight with Iowa, and you got to win the ugly, and they did. I would say Purdue's my favorite right now, so that's Nebraska's opportunity this Saturday to say no, they're not. And Minnesota, I think, is one I would not forget about. They play Illinois this week, and if Minnesota wins, they put themselves right back there. Wisconsin, I think, is going to hire Jim Leonard, and I think he'll do well enough that he'll get that job. Because when that came open, there was like, well, Leipold, maybe Wisconsin wants him, but I don't know, Bruntz. I kind of think Wisconsin's going to be in the race too, and Leonard's going to be the permanent guy there. We'll see, though.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, they kind of made the change at the right time too, because you get to make the change, and then you got Northwestern the following week, which is always apparently, if you're everybody but Nebraska, that you end up feeling good after that week. But yeah.
Too bad. Yeah, if Nebraska had that game, you'd have a little wiggle room, and you could, anyway, didn't happen. They're 3-3. Purdue Saturday. We'll have plenty to talk about. Come to Husker247 for all the latest practice report updates, recruiting, coaching search stuff, whatever Mickey says. Everybody loves whatever Mickey says right now. We will document all of it.
And hoops.
It's Big Ten Media Days, and that season is coming up quickly, and we'll have all the stuff. Come to Husker247.com for all the latest.